Toby has your raise over there. I ran the center for now it's over 20 years, but the last 8 years have been the most productive years of the center, and Mike Finch is the key to that. I'm very blessed in having Mike as my right hand in the center. And thank you all for coming. There's a lot of old friends here that I hadn't expected to see. Thank you for being here for this event about A Cracking of the Heart, which is a book I've written about my daughter Sarah, who died 2 years ago in her 44th year. I wrote the book not because I take any pleasure in bearing my wounds in public, but because I do take pleasure in her remarkable life and sharing that life with others. And because I believe that her example can be an inspiration to those who did not know her and a consolation to those who have lost loved ones too. It is a facet of our nature that we think and we act as though we are going to live forever. Consequently, we do not pay enough attention to the people we love who are here beside us. In our conversations with them, we are often distracted by other things going on in our lives, so that we do not hear fully what they are saying, or we cut the conversation short in order to get on with our own business. Or we let our own frustrations and agendas get in the way of hearing what they are saying. But when they are gone, we would give anything to have them back, to continue the conversation, any conversation, for even 1 minute more. My daughter's life and death are an instruction to appreciate what we have before it is gone. Sarah was born into this life with a birth condition known as Turner syndrome. Among the consequences of this condition, according to one medical encyclopedia, are a wide and webbed neck, low-set and curled ears, low hairline, small stature, swollen hands and feet, drooping eyelids, dry eyes, cataracts, obesity, diabetes, infertility, arthritis, middle ear infections, hearing loss, which in Sarah's case was progressive and severe. Also heart defects and high blood pressure, early death. The encyclopedia notes that there are no known preventions or cures. In an odd synchronicity, just before she died, Sarah was interviewed by an internet website. The interview appeared the day after her death. It was in part about her Aunt Barbara, who died a few years before and with whom Sarah was very close. The interviewer noted that Sarah had turned to Judaism in her mid-30s and asked whether her religious practice helped her to deal with Barbara's death. "I think it did," she said. "I am very comfortable with the fact that Judaism doesn't have a highly developed idea of what happens after you die, like Buddhism and Christianity. I pursued Judaism very much to find meaning, and I think at the heart of that pursuit is the fact that we all walk around with the knowledge that we're going to die." How did my daughter know this at what was still a fairly young age? It was in her. It was a condition she was born with. The Jewish idea of death that made the most sense to Sarah was the one called Gilgul Hanefesh, which means a rolling of the souls, and is the mystical equivalent of a life after life. It is basically reincarnation, she explained. In the interview, Sarah introduced a fact about herself that I hadn't known before. "I say the prayer, 'Blessed are you, God, you resurrect the dead,' every morning over my coffee." In counseling her over Barbara's loss, Sarah's rabbi had told her that while you can't have the person back, you should pay attention to the relationship, the ways it continues. I think now of the resurrection of my daughter in the way her rabbi advised. Pay attention to the ways in which your relationship continues. In confronting her disabilities, Sarah developed a fierce drive to be independent, not to have to rely on others. She would never concede she was handicapped. Emily Catcher, who was Sarah's roommate in college and for many years after, had to say about her. Sarah pretended there was nothing wrong with her all the time. Once I said to her, "You get a lot of ear infections." And that's how I found out that she had Turner syndrome. Her disabilities were visible, yet she was in denial about them. She wanted to carry on as though they didn't exist. She didn't want to make any adjustments because of them, and she didn't want anyone talking about them. All the arguments Emily remembers with Sarah were over such issues. Sarah was really easy to live with, the best roommate I ever had. We listened to the same records, didn't care about the messes we made, and were very happy together. But she'd get mad at me when I hassled her about her health, or when I said, "You are utterly qualified to get Social Security payments for people with disabilities." That would really steam her. "No," she would say, "I'm not disabled, and I'm not going to do that." And she didn't. Her sister Ann kept up the pressure, but in the end failed to persuade her. She still possesses the original Social Security application she requested for Sarah, which Sarah never signed. She had the same argument with her sister over getting a bus pass for the disabled. "I'm not disabled," she argued. Since Sarah didn't drive, buses were a crucial part of her existence. I once called her at 9 p.m. to ask her a question about Judaism. When I reached her, she was riding a bus from school. She was completing a degree for teaching special needs children. She answered my question with the same cheerfulness and wisdom that she did whenever I had such questions. But I was curious about the bus she was riding so late in the evening on a weekday. When I questioned her, she told me it was the third bus she had taken that evening to get home from school. 6 buses a night after a day of work, a practice she continued on and off for 20 years. And I never heard a word of complaint. In her 30s, she joined Beth Shalom, a synagogue in San Francisco. Its rabbi was Alan Liu. One of his words of advice was that everyone should discover their divine name, which was derived from the attribute which they hated most about themselves, but which was the source of their greatest virtue and was God's gift to them. To explain this, Rabbi Liu referred to the story of Jacob, who was never satisfied with who he was. The name Jacob is derived from the root ekev, which means heel. It was said that coming out of the womb, Jacob grabbed onto his brother Esau's heel in an attempt to be the firstborn. Eventually, Jacob cheated Esau out of his birthright. Later, he sought to marry the youngest daughter of Laban, rather than wooing the oldest, who by tradition should have been married first. Thus, Jacob was a person who was never satisfied with who he was, always seeking another's place. Then he wrestled with the angel of God and was given a new name, his divine name, which is Israel, which means he struggled with God. What Sarah hated about herself was her difference, which was stamped on her body and loaded her with handicaps, which she refused to see as handicaps, but which made every simple task in her life arduous, from getting groceries to getting to school and work to getting others to take her seriously. But this difference, which she hated, was her true gift, because it caused her to understand and identify with others who were different, and which inspired her remarkable empathy and compassion for them. Her life profession was working with autistic children, beginning with her niece Mariah. As a journalist, she wrote a pioneering story about hermaphrodites and championed their cause, defending their right not to have doctors decide to amputate their genitals when they were infants in the interests of their own good. She wrote letters in behalf of political prisoners, and she wrote letters to criminals in jail to give them a human contact. Working with the American Jewish World Service, and despite the difficulties she had when it came to navigating any distance, her overworked heart, the gastrointestinal problems that ravaged her body, she went to El Salvador to help Christians whose homes had been wiped out in a hurricane, to India to rescue Hindu girls from the sex trade rampant in the slums of Mumbai, and to Uganda, where she lived in a mud floor hut without electricity to teach the children of the Abayudaya, a tribe of African Jews, to read and write.